All right, so the National Identification System agenda has been one of the hottest topics in news, and this morning we want to explore as best as we can the implications of such a system. To help us to do that, we have Attorney at Law Alexi Robinson and Advocacy Manager at Jamaicans for Justice, Roger Malcolm. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Welcome to Smile Jamaica. Alexi, let me start with you as the lawyer. What is this all about? What exactly are we talking about?
Okay, well, the Act really tries to capture everybody's information, identification information, including fingerprints, signature, facial photograph. But it also goes further and catches demographic information, so things like your race, your religion, your your occupation, medical history, things like that. But as far as I know, in the Senate, there have been a lot of changes. And so, the draft that I may have seen is very different from what exists now. So I would want to say...
Yeah, from what you know, where is the contention here? What is wrong if them have all these things, if they want to know who am I?
Right.
So what's the contention here?
Right. Well, I think that there have been concerns. Roger had a great article in the paper about the demographic information being connected with the identification information. So normally, when we have a census where you get demographic information, it's anonymous. Here you would be linking it with identification information. I know that the government has said that it would be, it will still be anonymous. I don't know how in a data bank you separate that, and I think that's a question to be asked. There's also questions about whether or not there's a right of appeal to the court system. If somebody enters wrong information, there is a process for changing, but what if the authority takes a decision that's contrary to your position? Where do you go next? And I think there's concern too. It's been pushed as part of Article 6, the right for everyone to have recognition before the law. But there are provisions in the bill that would mean that some people may have their cards taken away from them or not issued to them. And so then what happens? It's almost as though there's a denial of your right to recognition before the law. So those would be some of... the other thing I would say is that data protection generally, we don't yet have a Data Protection Act in Jamaica. So you're gathering all this information in a legal environment. Exactly. And so in a legal environment where we don't yet have protection. And the draft Data Protection Bill actually speaks to the two core principles of data limitation and data minimization, right? So you want to only be capturing the data you need for the specific purpose because there is always the concern about hacking. So you want to minimize the amount of data. So when you have this huge aggrandizement of information about people, very personal, private information about people, you're exposing us to greater risk.
Can I come in and just ask, some things are mandatory with the national ID. So there's some things you can volunteer the information, right? That's what they're saying with the bill. But Jamaicans are coming out and saying you should have consulted with the people, whether that be by referendum, which means going to the people for a vote, or whether or not there should have been a joint select committee. Explain to us, what is, for the people, they wanted to be consulted, yeah? And they weren't. They feel they weren't. So what kind of justice for the people now that the Senate has passed this ID bill? Where do we go from here for the people to be involved?
Well, I'll start by saying the consultation process has been contentious. Jamaicans for Justice, to be fair, has been quite intimate in the process since about March, and several other civil society groups have been participating. And so the government has staged consultations. What I will say is that civil society formal groups is not Joe Public. And so I understand why the public would have been concerned that there ought to have been a formal process for public participation. So the government didn't reach out to you, you weren't part of the consultation. And so I understand that concern. I'll leave it up to the political parties to conclude as to the best way to have gone about the consultation. But to speak about possibly some of the changes that were lobbied for, especially by JFJ, that were achieved on Friday in the Senate and on Monday. And so Alexi mentioned the article I had written about distinguishing between like your race and your religion from like your birth and death and that kind of stuff. And so the government has agreed throughout the law to remove much of the references to demographic information, for example, in the verification procedure. So under Section 20, subsection 6 and 7, the authority is under legal obligation to verify all data it receives. The challenge that arose before the government fixed this issue was that the authority have to verify your religion, and it would have been unworkable. It was a technical error, and it was throughout. So for example, there's a the private entities have the authority to apply to the authority to verify someone's information. Prior to fixing that distinction between demographic and identity information, they technically could apply to verify your race, religion, education, and therefore it could have been intrusive. And so for us, we're very, very pleased that finally, you know, after a few months, government has agreed to remove almost all the references to demographic information where adverse outcomes could flow. So if you give your wrong religion, you say you're a Muslim or you're a Christian or a Rasta, they can't revoke your card for that.
But you can change.
Yeah, it can change. And so there was an obligation even under Section 19 to update any information that was in need of updating. And when applied to demographic information, it could have been intrusive. If you get a new degree, you have to apply to the authority or you'd be in breach. And so I think one of the values of the process and the participatory process has been that we've been able to achieve a few of those successes, but there are a few concerns that we still have.
Alexi, it sounds, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure you will, that you guys don't have an issue with a national identification system.
Right.
Okay, so where exactly would the issue be? You said about the demographic and stuff.
Right.
Exactly where do you think?
I think the issue is how we go about doing a national identification system. So if it really, if we weren't trying to capture demographics at the same time, if we weren't trying to make it mandatory, so it's in the sense of you won't be able to do transactions with the government. The delivery of goods and services from public bodies will not now be able to happen unless you have this national identification card.
So where was this TRN, and isn't that
yes
one of the things that you could use before?
So yes, so under Section 41, subsection 1, all public bodies, and that's really every government body at all, even government companies in which the government can direct, is required to require the card of a person in order to facilitate delivery of goods and services. Back in July, we pointed out, hey, I get where you're going, we're not really too happy with it, but even if you pursue, you need to exempt essential services, you know, like fire brigade, the police, you know, public hospitals, road construction, schools. And so in the lower house, we were successful in getting a suite of essential services exempted. However, in the Senate, the government Senate has disagreed with that and have since removed that exemption and limited it to only states of emergency or threats to life or health. The challenge that we face is that there are a universe of possibilities outside of that where it would be inappropriate to require a card. For example, you have a right to legal aid. Legal aid is a government scheme. Technically, legal aid will be covered in, so you have your ID card, you can't get legal aid. Or it's not only about us. Let's think about the government services that may be compromised. So you have a HIV program that does confidential HIV testing and screening. If you come up, you can get a free test and a free screen.
No, you'd have to offer,
your
card.
They would be under an obligation to require the card. And so we think you can, we think the government can still achieve its goals of trying to ensure that every public body uses it, even if you have a little issue, while still nuancing it. So you could have exemptions permitted in regulations, which we think is
but there are also concerns too. If you were in the process of challenging something, let's say somebody had gone and said that they're Alexi Robinson and their fingerprint was now associated with my name, and I'm challenging that. What happens to those two individuals during that process of being challenged? And how long will that take? And then what happens if you need goods and services in that period of time? So, I mean, our proposal was that there should be some alternate form so that where there's a good reason why you don't have your NIDS, or for example, if the cards themselves get compromised, as happened in Estonia recently, that there should be some alternate form of transacting government with business with government.
So does that mean that whenever it comes on stream, it will be the only form of identification you could use? I can't use my passport no more.